The sky over the Scottish Highlands was painted in strokes of stormy gray and violet, the wind curling like fingers through the hills. A single figure soared above the mist, faster than the eye could follow, cloaked in a red cape that snapped like a banner against the clouds. Clark Kent hovered for a moment over the estate, his eyes narrowing as he took in the land below. The mansion stood like a ghost from another time, tall, proud, and alone. Black stone walls, spiked towers, and ivy that crawled like veins over its skin. It didn't welcome him. It waited. He landed silently at the front gates, boots settling onto the overgrown path. The iron arch above him bore his family's name in weathered script, nearly erased by years of wind and rain. Elfhorn Manor. He had never heard of it, never knew a Kent ancestor lived this far across the ocean. The key had arrived in a simple box. No letter, no explanation, just an address and the name of a relative long buried in shadows. Clark pushed open the gates, which creaked like something waking from sleep. Birds scattered from the trees. Thunder rumbled low in the clouds above. He didn't flinch. Even gods had to face mystery eventually. Inside, the mansion was as still as a painting. Dust floated in the air like memory. The front door groaned on its hinges, revealing a grand hall lost in silence. Chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the ceiling. Velvet curtains faded to gray. The kind of place time had given up on. He stepped forward slowly, boots echoing on marble floors. The fireplace was cold. The air colder. But something pulsed faintly beneath the stillness, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Clark frowned. His senses were sharp, honed by years of heroism, and something wasn't right. The house wasn't empty. He could feel it. A flicker at the edge of his vision, red and soft like candlelight, vanished just as he turned. He called out, voice steady, "Is someone here?" No answer, only silence, but the house seemed to breathe now. He moved deeper through the hall, past portraits that watched with hollow eyes and staircases that spiraled like twisted ribbon. Then, just for a second, he saw her. At the top of the stairs, wrapped in a scarlet shimmer, stood a woman with eyes that burned like dying stars. Her red coat floated behind her, untouched by wind, and her hair framed her face like wildfire caught in moonlight. She didn't speak. She didn't move. And then, she was gone. Clark's breath caught. Not in fear, in recognition. Not of her, but of the feeling that he had just seen the beginning of something he could never undo. He reached the base of the staircase, heart thrumming beneath his calm. Who was she? The mansion, suddenly, didn't feel inherited. It felt shared. And somewhere in the walls, hidden behind whispers and old spells, the house seemed to smile. Because Superman had come home. But someone had never left. Wanda Maximoff had never been the type to stay hidden for long. She wasn't afraid of the shadows that clung to this house. No, she wore the darkness like a crown. But when Clark Kent stepped into the mansion, her pulse quickened in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had been waiting here, in this place, in this moment, tangled between magic and memory. She had come to escape, to bury the chaos of her past beneath walls that seemed to hum with the same unspeakable grief that lived inside her. The mansion had welcomed her like a lover, whispering to her with every creak of its wood, every groan of its stone. It was alive, breathing her pain, offering solace in return for her heart. She had lived here in peace, alone with her grief and her rage. But now there was him. Her fingers twitched as she watched him from the landing. His broad shoulders and the softness of his expression made her want to shatter him with words, mock him for his hope, his kindness, the very purity that clung to him like a second skin. Yet she did nothing, because she knew better than anyone that nothing could break the man in front of her, not his strength, nor his invulnerability, not even the weight of 1,000 worlds. And that terrified her. She had sensed him before she saw him, his presence like a beacon in the air. Even from a distance, she could feel the light that radiated from him, burning through the walls, through her walls. His very existence was a challenge to everything she had become, to everything she had lost. Clark's voice echoed softly in the hall. "Is someone here?" Her breath caught, but she did not move. "He is not real," she told herself. "This is not real." And yet, her heart beat faster than it should have. Wanda had faced countless enemies, but never had she felt the earth beneath her feet tremble like this. He was no ordinary man. She could feel it in her bones. He was someone made from hope itself, something she had once known, but no longer believed in. She let her magic hum, a pulse of crimson light that flickered briefly in the air, leaving the air thick with tension. She stepped out from the shadows at the top of the stairs, her red cloak swaying like an ethereal flame. When Clark's eyes found her, the world stopped. Time itself held its breath. For a moment, neither of them moved. There was no greeting, no recognition, only the endless silence between them. But there was something in the way his eyes softened, something he didn't mean to show. A deep sorrow, a warmth she hadn't expected. "No, Wanda," she scolded herself. "You don't need him. You don't need anyone." And yet, her voice slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you here?" His gaze hardened, but his words were gentle. "I inherited this place. I was hoping to find answers." Answers. The word hung in the air like a ghost, and Wanda felt herself standing at the edge of something she didn't want to cross. She wasn't ready to share her story, to reveal why she had been living here, isolated from the world. Not yet. Not with him. But the energy between them was undeniable. She could feel it now, the same thing that had drawn her to this place, this mansion, this wreckage of a past she couldn't let go of. Clark took a step forward, his footsteps so quiet against the old floorboards. "You don't belong here alone." Her heart skipped, and the words she had so carefully kept buried began to surface. "Maybe I do." Wanda turned her back to him before she could say anything more, but the red flicker of her magic burned brighter, and for the first time in years, she wondered if there was more to this life than walls, than the weight of her own brokenness. She couldn't let herself feel this way. But the mansion was shifting again, like it too was taking sides. And for the first time, the walls that had once been comforting seemed to close in. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as Clark watched Wanda turn her back on him, her movements fluid, as if the world itself bent around her. The flicker of her red magic lingered in the air, like heat rising from the ground. He could feel it now, the tension that crackled between them, a storm waiting to break. His chest tightened. He hadn't expected to find someone like her. He hadn't expected to find anything here. This mansion had been a mystery, a shadow of a legacy he didn't understand. But now, standing in this cold hall, with Wanda's presence like a flame that threatened to burn him, he knew he had stumbled into something far deeper than forgotten family. "You don't belong here alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt more fragile than he intended. He was used to being the one who gave answers, the one who held the power. But in her presence, all that seemed to fade. She didn't answer him, didn't turn back. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft shuffle of her cloak brushing against the marble floor. Then, almost imperceptibly, she spoke. "No one does." Her words were heavy, soaked in sorrow, as if she had lived 1,000 lifetimes in solitude. Clark's eyes softened. He had seen that look before, the kind of grief that twisted in a person's soul until it made them forget how to breathe. He didn't know what had happened to her, what had made her retreat into this mansion, this forgotten place. But he understood loneliness. He understood what it was like to carry a world on your shoulders and feel it crushing you beneath its weight. He took a step forward, his boots quiet against the old floorboards. The air between them crackled again, and Wanda stiffened, as though every inch of her body was warning her to keep her distance. But she didn't move. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, his voice lower now, as though he were trying not to break the fragile moment between them. "But I'm here. I don't think I can leave without understanding what this place means, without understanding you." She flinched, just barely. It was enough for him to see. enough to feel the sharpness of the walls she had built around herself. She wasn't just hiding from him. She was hiding from herself. "You don't need to understand me," she replied, her voice quieter now, more resigned. "People never do." Clark's heart ached at the distance in her words. "I don't think that's true. I think people need to understand each other more than they realize, more than they want to admit." Wanda's eyes flashed, a burst of red lightning behind her gaze. For a moment, it seemed like she might unleash the fury of everything she had hidden, everything she had buried. But instead, she let out a long breath, one that seemed to carry the weight of the world with it. "And what if I don't want to be understood?" she asked, her tone shifting, like a blade sliding through the tension. "What if I want to stay hidden? What if I don't want anyone to know the truth of what I've done?" Clark's chest tightened, but his voice was steady. "We all have things we regret. We all carry pieces of the past with us. But that doesn't mean we should hide forever." Her laughter was bitter, edged with a kind of pain that struck him deep. "You think I choose this?" she asked, her eyes darkening. "You think I choose to hide from the world?" "I think." Clark hesitated, stepping closer. "I think you're more than what you've been through." For the first time, Wanda turned to face him fully. The air between them seemed to thrum with something almost electric. She studied him with eyes that could see through the layers of armor he wore. The cape, the shield, the perfect smile. She saw the weight of his burdens too. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered, the words laced with the kind of sorrow that could drown cities. "I don't," he agreed, his gaze unyielding. "But I want to." The silence that followed was heavy, a kind of unspoken invitation, a question hanging between them. Neither moved, yet both knew the air was charged with something neither could name, something dangerous, something inevitable. And then, without a word, Wanda turned and began to walk deeper into the mansion, her presence like a flame flickering just out of reach. Clark stood still, his heart pounding. He had felt it, whatever it was. That spark, that connection. Something was changing. The mansion had chosen its side, and now it was too late to turn back. The mansion felt alive, its walls breathing in rhythm with the pulse of the storm outside. Clark couldn't explain it, the way the air seemed to hum with something old, something ancient. As he stood in the heart of the manor, the silence wrapped around him like a second skin, thicker than the shadows that clung to every corner. Wanda had vanished deeper into the house after their exchange. Her presence lingered like a flicker of light in the distance, drawing him in. He felt it, the pull. The mansion itself seemed to beckon him, whispering in voices he couldn't hear but could feel in the pit of his stomach. He moved quietly through the halls, each step measured, each breath steady. The grandeur of the manor stretched endlessly in every direction. Long corridors lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors, their eyes following him with a strange intensity. The wood of the floors creaked beneath his feet, and the faint smell of dust and forgotten history lingered in the air. Yet there was something more. A presence, subtle but undeniable, wrapped itself around him, urging him forward. As he turned a corner, the temperature dropped sharply. His breath became visible in the cold air, a thin mist rising before him. Clark paused. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in the back of his mind, the tugging sensation that made his skin prickle. This wasn't just a house of stone and wood. This was a place that held secrets, and not all of them were meant to be uncovered. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and his senses sharpened. There at the end of the hall, a figure in red. Wanda, her back turned, her shoulders tense. She was standing still, her head slightly tilted as though listening to something just out of reach. The shadows seemed to reach out for her, twisting and curling around her form like tendrils of smoke. "Wanda," Clark called softly, not wanting to startle her, but his voice still carried through the heavy air. She didn't respond immediately. For a moment, all he could hear was the distant rumble of thunder and the soft, endless whisper of the mansion. Then, slowly, Wanda turned, her face as unreadable as ever. But her eyes were different, darker, torn between something dangerous and something desperate. "This house is alive," she said, her voice low, almost strained. "It's always watching. It listens. It remembers." Clark stepped closer, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" The red glow of her magic flickered around her like a fragile aura, but it was unsteady, wavering like a candle in the wind. She shook her head, almost as though she were fighting something inside of herself. "I thought I could escape," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I thought I could bury my past here. But this place, it doesn't let go. It feeds off my grief. It feeds off of us." Clark's brow furrowed. He had never seen Wanda like this, so vulnerable, so broken. The strength he knew her for, the fierce warrior who had bent the fabric of reality itself, seemed distant. All that was left in front of him was a woman who had been worn down by too many battles, too many sacrifices. He took another step, reaching out. "Wanda, you don't have to fight this alone." She flinched, as if his words had struck too deep. But before she could respond, the house seemed to respond for her. The walls groaned, and the floor beneath their feet trembled. A low, guttural sound echoed through the halls. A whisper so faint it was almost imperceptible, yet it clawed at their minds. It was the house, Clark realized. It wasn't just alive, it was trying to speak, to communicate, to manipulate. "Get out," Wanda said suddenly, her voice breaking. "You need to leave. This place doesn't want you here." But Clark didn't move. "I'm not leaving you." The mansion groaned louder, the shadows creeping closer, curling around Wanda's form, pulling at the edges of her magic. And for the first time, Clark saw fear in her eyes. Something ancient stirred in the mansion, something far older than both of them. And it wasn't going to let either of them go. The mansion groaned, its foundations trembling as though the very bones of the house were waking. Shadows surged through the corridors like living things, twisting and coiling around the stone walls, crawling across the ceiling in dark patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the house's own heartbeat. Clark could feel it, the pressing weight of the house, the crushing pressure of the ancient power that it held. He stood in the center of the grand hall, his fists clenched at his sides. The storm outside had raged into a violent fury. And now, inside the house, the walls screamed in quiet agony. He turned to look at Wanda, standing a few feet away from him. Her red cloak whipped around her legs like a flame caught in the wind. She was trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, something far darker than the storm outside. "I told you to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that seemed to come from the very air around them. "I'm not going anywhere." Clark's voice was firm, unwavering. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, just for them. He took a step closer to her, reaching out a hand, but she flinched back, her eyes flashing with something he couldn't quite name. "This isn't you, Wanda. You don't have to be afraid. We can fight this together." But as his words left his lips, the mansion seemed to shudder violently, its pulse quickening. The shadows around them writhed, converging into a dark cloud that hovered above them, growing larger, more oppressive with each passing second. And in the heart of the storm, a red light began to glow, a crimson aura that pulsed like the beating of a heart, faster, faster, until it exploded into a blinding flash of light. For a moment, everything went white. Clark shielded his eyes instinctively, his superhuman senses overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the light. But even as the light faded, he could feel it. Something was changing. The air was thick with magic, and the walls of the mansion seemed to bend, warping under the weight of whatever had been unleashed. When the light died down, Wanda was standing at the center of the room, her body trembling, her face twisted in a silent scream. Her hands were raised above her head, fingers crackling with red energy that shot out in violent bursts, dancing along the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The house had become a cage, and the bars were magic, magic that Wanda had summoned in desperation, in agony. "Wanda, stop!" Clark shouted, rushing forward, but the energy around her flared, pushing him back, sending him crashing into the stone wall with a force that left him momentarily dazed. He staggered to his feet, his cape fluttering behind him like a storm, his eyes locked onto her. She was losing herself. He could see it now, the dark power that had always lingered just beneath the surface of her grief. It was consuming her, threatening to swallow everything in its path. And he couldn't let that happen. "Please, Wanda," he shouted again, his voice desperate now, the words strangled by the power that clung to the air. "I'm here. You're not alone." For a moment, everything stopped. The magic around her flickered, dimming. Wanda's eyes, those piercing, stormy eyes, locked onto his, and for the briefest of moments, he saw something in them, something human, something real. But the moment passed, and the crimson magic flared up once again. The mansion roared in fury, its foundations shaking, as if it too were part of the storm Wanda had unleashed. "Get out of here!" Wanda screamed, her voice breaking, but the words were laced with the kind of power that made the entire house tremble. "I can't stop it." Clark's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and determination surging through him. He took another step toward her, undeterred by the magic that crackled in the air, sparking against his skin. "I'm not leaving you, Wanda," he said, his voice stronger than ever. "We can fix this, together." With every word, he felt the power of his own resolve pushing back against the tide of magic surrounding her. But even as he stepped closer, the house seemed to fight back, its shadows reaching for him, pulling him into their grip. The storm inside the mansion and the storm outside had merged, a whirlwind of chaos and fury. And in the center of it all stood Wanda, caught between the woman she had been and the power she could no longer control. And Clark was the only one who could save her. The mansion had become a battleground, the walls cracking and groaning under the weight of the magic that Wanda had unleashed. The very air seemed to pulse, charged with a raw energy that made Clark's skin tingle, the ground beneath his feet trembling as if the house itself were alive and fighting against them. Wanda stood in the center of it all, her hands still raised, her fingers crackling with wild red energy that filled the room with a frightening brilliance. Her eyes were wild, distant, lost to the power that had taken root deep within her. "You need to stop," Clark said, his voice firm but gentle. He moved closer, pushing against the invisible wall of magic that surrounded her. It was as if the very essence of the house was trying to keep him away. Every step he took, the shadows seemed to lash out at him, a dark reminder of the force that had taken hold of Wanda. She didn't respond, her gaze far away, focused on something only she could see. The air around her shimmered, like a heatwave, bending the light and distorting everything around her. "Wanda, listen to me." Clark's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with the urgency of the moment. He had never felt more helpless, more desperate. "I won't leave you. You don't have to do this alone." She blinked, slowly, and for a fraction of a second, the wildness in her eyes seemed to flicker. Her shoulders trembled as though the weight of the world were pressing down on her. The crimson glow of her magic dimmed, but only for a heartbeat. Then, just as quickly, it flared brighter, burning hotter. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain of the power inside her. "I can't control it anymore. The house, this place, it controls me. It knows my every fear, every regret. It's feeding on me." The words hit Clark like a physical blow. He could see it now. The darkness that had taken root inside her, the way it twisted and corrupted everything she had once believed in. It wasn't just the power of the house that was tearing her apart. It was her own pain, her own grief that had been magnified by the magic. Clark took another step forward, his heart pounding. The shadows lashed out at him, but he pushed through, his resolve hardening with each passing second. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. He couldn't let the darkness take her completely. "Wanda," he said, his voice low and steady, "you are not your pain. You are not your past. You don't have to carry this burden anymore." Her gaze snapped to him, and the energy around her fluctuated. A jagged bolt of red lightning surged from her hands, crackling toward him. But before it could hit, Clark held up his hand, his chest glowing with the power of his own energy. The bolt hit him, but he absorbed it, the energy flowing through him, leaving him unharmed. He stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes never leaving hers. He knew the risks, knew that the power inside her could destroy everything in its path. But he wasn't afraid. Not of the magic, not of the house. He was afraid of losing her. "I know what it's like to feel like you're too broken to be fixed," Clark said softly, his words wrapping around her like a shield. "But I'm here, Wanda. I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, Wanda didn't respond. The room was silent, save for the distant rumble of thunder outside. The magic in the air had quieted, but it still pulsed, like a storm waiting to break. Then something shifted. Slowly, painfully, Wanda's hands lowered. The crimson glow faded, leaving only the flickering remnants of the magic that had once been so wild. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her as the weight of everything she had been holding onto crashed down on her all at once. Clark stepped forward, his hand reaching out, tentative but sure. He touched her arm gently, and she didn't pull away. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice full of quiet strength. "And I'm not leaving you, Wanda. Not now, not ever." For the first time, she looked at him. Not as a hero, not as the Superman who could stop worlds from falling, but as a man who was standing there, in the middle of the storm, with nothing to offer but himself. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of the mansion and the lingering echoes of the battle, something shifted between them. The magic still crackled in the air, but now it felt like it was waiting, as if the world was holding its breath. The house was silent. For the first time in what felt like forever, it was silent. The silence in the mansion was deafening. The air, once crackling with raw energy, had stilled, the magic lingering only as a faint hum, like the aftershocks of an earthquake. The house seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something, waiting for them to make the next move. Clark stood before Wanda, his hand still resting gently on her arm. Her head hung low, her breath shallow, as though the weight of the world had finally caught up with her. The crimson glow of her magic had faded, leaving only the faintest trace of red light lingering around her hands. He could feel it, the exhaustion that radiated from her, the depth of the pain she had been carrying alone for so long. The power she had wielded was not just a weapon. It was a manifestation of everything she had lost, everything she had buried in the deepest corners of her heart. And now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't hiding from it. She wasn't hiding from herself. Wanda finally lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were no longer filled with rage or fear, but with something softer, something raw and broken. For a moment, Clark didn't know what to say. He wasn't a man of many words. He was a man of action, of hope. But this was different. This was something beyond the realms of his powers. "I don't know how to fix this," Wanda whispered, her voice barely audible, as though speaking louder would shatter everything around them. "I've hurt so many people. I've destroyed things I can't take back." Clark's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He stepped closer, his presence like a steadying force in the storm that still raged inside her. "We all have things we regret, things we wish we could undo. But that doesn't define us, Wanda. What defines us is how we rise from it, how we move forward." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I don't know how to move forward. I've been running from this, from everything, for so long." Clark's hand gently cupped her cheek, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside the mansion disappeared. There was no storm, no shadows, no mansion crumbling around them. There was only the two of them, standing together, the weight of the past heavy on their shoulders. "You don't have to run anymore," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not going anywhere, Wanda. I'm here." The words hung between them, suspended in the quiet, like a promise, like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in the sea of their own doubts. Wanda closed her eyes, as though letting the warmth of his words wash over her, and for the first time, Clark saw the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she reached up to take his. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and in that touch, Clark felt the rawness of everything she had been through. The loneliness, the sorrow, the battles she had fought both outside and within herself. "I don't know if I deserve this," Wanda said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared the weight of the truth would crush her. Clark's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles, his gaze never leaving hers. "Everyone deserves a chance, Wanda. Everyone deserves redemption. Even you." The storm outside began to quiet, the winds dying down as if the world itself had paused to listen. Inside the mansion, the shadows retreated, as though the house, too, had heard the words spoken between them. The red light that had once surrounded Wanda faded completely, leaving only a faint glow in the air, like the dying embers of a fire that had once raged too hot and too fast. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison, now seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting just a little. Wanda's lips trembled, but a small tentative smile curved at the corners of her mouth, a smile that was fragile, but real. For the first time, she looked at him not as a hero or a savior, but as someone who had simply offered her something she hadn't thought possible, a chance to begin again. And in that moment, Clark knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, there would be pain. But there would also be something else, hope. And with hope, there was always the possibility of healing. "You're not alone," he whispered, his voice full of quiet conviction. "Not anymore." The mansion stood still, its crumbling walls now a silent witness to the bond that had begun to form between them, a bond that could never be broken. The first rays of dawn began to filter through the broken windows of the mansion, casting soft, golden light across the remnants of the storm. The mansion, once a place of darkness and dread, now seemed to breathe with a new energy, as though it too were shedding its past. Clark stood beside Wanda, watching the light shift across the ruins. His hand still rested gently on her shoulder, a steady presence in the aftermath of the chaos. The storm outside had faded, leaving only a gentle breeze and the distant sound of birds beginning to sing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace. Wanda's gaze was distant, but not in the same way it had been before. The darkness that had clouded her eyes had lifted, and in its place was something quieter, something full of possibility. She wasn't just the Scarlet Witch anymore. She wasn't the embodiment of grief and magic gone awry. She was Wanda, Wanda who had survived, Wanda who had fought for her redemption. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward or strained. It was a space filled with understanding, with the knowledge that the battle had not been won by sheer strength, but by something deeper, by the trust they had placed in each other. Finally, Wanda turned to him, her eyes soft but intense. "Do you think I can still make things right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the question itself was fragile. Clark's heart tightened. He had seen the weight of her past, the burden she had carried alone for so long. He knew that her road ahead would not be easy, that there would be moments when the shadows would return, trying to pull her back into the darkness. But he also knew that she wasn't the same woman she had been when she first stepped into this mansion. She had faced her demons, and for the first time, she was ready to fight for something more. "You've already started," Clark said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "You've already chosen to fight for yourself. That's where it begins. Everything else, it comes after." Wanda looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once caused so much destruction, now trembling slightly. The red magic that had once crackled with uncontrolled fury was gone, replaced by a quiet power that seemed to hum softly within her. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice thick with vulnerability. Everything feels so broken. Clark smiled gently, his hand moving to cup her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. Start with the things that matter most. The people you care about. The people you can help. She stared into his eyes, the weight of his words sinking in, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that had long been extinguished in her heart. She wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. A distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky, though the clouds had all but vanished. The storm had passed, but the memories of its violence still lingered, like the last remnants of a nightmare fading with the light of day. Clark stepped back, his cape brushing the floor, as he glanced around the mansion. "This place is going to need some work," he said with a small chuckle. It was an attempt to lighten the mood, but it was also a reminder that the world wasn't just going to reset itself. The mansion may have been the birthplace of so much darkness, but it could also become a place of renewal, a place where both of them could heal. Wanda's lips parted in a soft laugh, the sound almost foreign to her ears after so long. "I think we've got our work cut out for us." Clark smiled, the warmth in his eyes unmistakable. Together. As they stood there, side by side, the mansion behind them seemed to grow stiller, its once constant groaning and shifting now quiet, as if it too had come to terms with the changes that had unfolded within its walls. The red light that had filled every crevice had dissipated, leaving only the soft glow of morning light to fill the space. Together, they had faced the storm, and now together, they would rebuild. With one last glance at the mansion, Clark extended his hand to Wanda. She hesitated for only a moment before she took it, her fingers curling around his. The house was no longer a prison. It was a new beginning. And as they walked out into the morning light, the world ahead seemed full of endless possibilities.